Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Don, thank you for joining us. Actually, I think everybody would just like to ask their own questions, but I'll try to read everybody's mind here and hop to it. And thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us today. I would say Ford is clearly one of the leading car companies that is trying to struggle with this disruption that the industry is facing, and that disruption leads to internal disruption as well as external disruption. And I'd like to kick it off, if we could, by you clarifying or describing the nature of the decision making and the internal implications for responding to these emerging opportunities.
Sure, absolutely. We are, as has been described quite frequently, we are at this inflection point, so to speak. And the way that we view it within Ford is our core business, another way of referring to that is our hardware business, so to speak, is very healthy. It's very robust. Record-setting profit margins, very, very high-quality vehicles, very good acceptance around the world from a market share standpoint. So that core business is doing really well. At the same time, there are these emerging opportunities that we need to be cognizant of and that we need to take advantage of. And so even internally, in terms of how we've begun to communicate, we are picturing both of those parts of our business, the core and the emerging, as being related, but the emerging needing to have its own separation in the sense of needing to move quickly, needing to move much, much more rapidly. As Mark Fields has described it, we are not just an automotive company, but we're an automotive and a mobility company as well. And then I take that just a little bit further to say we're not just a hardware company, we're a hardware, software, and services company. And that software and services piece is where that emerging area really comes to bear. And so a couple of things that we've done internally in terms of organizing ourselves to best deliver against those opportunities. First is that we recognize that software services space, it cuts across our traditional skill team or functional boundaries, right? It's not just IT, it's not just marketing, it's not just product development. And so, for instance, even in my own case, right, I lead connected vehicle and services for Ford, and I report to Raj Nair, who heads our product development. I also report to Marcy Cleavorn, who heads IT, and I report to Stephen Odell, who heads marketing. Some people say if you have three bosses, do you really have a boss? But nonetheless, it helps me and it helps us to integrate across the skill teams and the functions within the business. And then the other thing that we've done is we've set up Ford Smart Mobility LLC to capitalize on those business opportunities that come about as a result of the capabilities that we deliver in the emerging services area.
I hate to interrupt or slow you down at all, but those were the two big announcements, right? So Ford Pass and Ford Smart Mobility. So if you could put it in context, because you clearly sit at the fulcrum of this activity, and you look remarkably relaxed for someone with three bosses, by the way. But Ford Pass, I think, and Smart Mobility LLC will look both fascinating and baffling, I think, to a lot of people around the world, including maybe even some Ford people. So if you could really clearly describe how all those pieces fit together.
Sure. So Ford Pass, the way to think about it is it's a platform. It's a platform for the delivery of services. It's manifested as a mobile app, right? And so it's a very familiar interface for people, but the way that we view it is as a platform for not only integrating some of the aspects of our core business, and so you can easily schedule and make dealer appointments, for instance, but it will also be the platform that will deliver some of these new emerging services. We'll leverage that platform to deliver these services. So things like parking assistance, for instance, or actually payment for parking as we go forward. Maybe even aspects of last mile journey mapping, so to speak. And so that platform for delivery will be our kind of customer-facing interface. That will be the way that we relate to customers. The way to think about Ford Smart Mobility, the LLC, is that will be the business entity that then creates and capitalizes on things that we develop or things that result as a consequence of value that we might create or working with third parties to create those kinds of values, right? And the context is very It's analogous to what we do with Ford Credit. Ford Credit needs to operate in a different way than the core business because of what's necessary within the financial services industry. Ford Smart Mobility needs to operate differently than the core business in order to move quickly, in order to move rapidly, in order to move at the speed and the pace that's necessary within that emerging services space. So Ford Pass, the platform for delivery to customers, Ford Smart Mobility, the entity that will capitalize on the business opportunities.
So you already have my head spinning, even though I know within the organization there are some heads and wheels spinning because there's so many new people to go with these new organizations, as well as people being moved around internally. And at the same time, what I hear implied in what you're describing is, there's going to be data coming out of this. What can we do with that data? And also, you just brought insurance and credit into the mix, which has huge implications. I almost don't know where to start, but I'm going to stick one more question. Organizationally speaking, where is Ford at sort of staffing up organizationally for this and sorting out who's doing what? And again, back to that core versus emerging, if you're working in the core business, I mean, I imagine there are still people on the core business side sort of scratching their heads. So, how do you, because you're on all sides of this issue, managing this, what is the messaging internally to make sense of all this?
First and foremost is that our business is changing, right? That's one of the fundamental messages that we communicate internally, and it's obviously communicated externally as well, that our business is changing and that what mobility will be represented by as we go forward is different than where we were in the past, right? Quite simply, the automobile as the single point solution to opening the highways for all mankind, it's no longer going to be a universally applicable solution, right? We've got 1 billion vehicles that are on the roads today, and if you project forward the growth rates by 2030, that would be 2 billion vehicles where there's not enough space for 2 billion vehicles. So we know that the way that people will get around, the way that goods will be transported will change as we go forward. So this whole landscape around mobility services is shifting. We need to change, shift, and adapt with it. So communicating the truth, first and foremost, and then communicating that the core continues to be very important, and we're merging that with these new emerging services. It's not an either or, it's a both. And then putting people at the intersection so that we can communicate to both of those sides, like myself, for instance, and then also recognizing that some of the skills, some of the talents that we need on the emerging services side don't necessarily exist within our business, and so establishing that as a separate entity, bringing in Jim Hackett as the chair, and he's going to be searching and finding a CEO, and that'll be happening very, very soon here, and then staffing up that business with business development folks, folks that are from a more entrepreneurial bent, and just thinking about that in those terms. But again, those emerging services will be dependent upon the capabilities that we deliver out of the core. So whether it's embedded connections in the vehicle, the data that we get out of the vehicle, and how we make use of that data, those will be fundamental enablers for those emerging services.
That seems to be the core issue. We're getting data, and what should we be doing with that data? How do we handle that data?
Sure.
Is that primarily the responsibility of Smart Mobility to come up with those use cases and applications and business models?
It's a collective responsibility. And so underneath this umbrella of Ford Smart Mobility, we've got the connectivity to the vehicle, we've got the autonomous development that we have underway, we've got the mobility services and experiments that we already have underway. Data and analytics is a key part of that as well, and there's a whole new organization around data and analytics internally within the business, and then focusing on the customer experience. And so first and foremost, with regard to data, from a Ford perspective, that vehicle data, it's the customer's data. And we view ourselves as stewards of that data on behalf of our customers. And so we will not collect any data without the informed consent of our customers. And if we use that data in a personally identifiable way, we make sure we have their consent for that usage. Now, there's also opportunities in terms of what we could do on an aggregated basis. There are opportunities that we could take advantage of with our vehicles as sensors and the data that's available there as well. And so the landscape is quite broad in terms of what some of the opportunities are. And each of those pockets are looking at different things and looking at different ways of leveraging the data and conducting experiments and trying to understand what things make sense. Because for us, it's not about just, oh, here's a car sharing service, let's go do it, right? We need to understand, where does it make sense for us to play? What assets do we bring to the table that uniquely position us? And then how are we going to win? in this space. So we're taking what we hope is a more strategic kind of approach to it and trying to understand, instead of just diving in and doing things because others are doing them, right? What makes sense for us uniquely, and what can we do, potentially with other partners as well, that creates value that enhances our position as we go forward in time?
Well, and speaking of which, you started putting LTE modems in some of your cars. I'm driving a 2017 Escape right now. But Ford was obviously the leader in trying to leverage the connected smartphone in the car to deliver all the value, or as much of the value as possible, that normally an embedded modem would deliver. Are you stepping away from that? What's the story going forward?
Yeah, so Roger, as you say, we've had the lead with Sync in terms of interacting with broad-end devices and leveraging the content, the capabilities, the even computing capability of that device, right, in the applications. As we move forward with more embedded connections within our vehicles as well, we view those as mutual approaches. They are not exclusive approaches. And depending on the user experience that we're trying to enable, in some cases that broad-end device may be more effective and efficient. In other cases, particularly in terms of data and being able to remotely access the vehicle, having that embedded connection makes sense as well. So it's not an either or, it's a both. And in a sense, it's just like core and emerging, right? Both of those together. So the broad-end capability as well as the built-in capability.
In that vehicle that I'm driving is CarPlay and Android Auto. It's Ford's first car with both, plus Sync 3. So there's quite a number of options in there, including SiriusXM. I think there was a certain perception that once Apple and Google got into the car, the manufacturer specified smartphone connectivity solution would go away. What's actually happening with Ford Sync?
So the way that we view it is about enabling, I joke, I say enabling our customers' digital lifestyles, and at some point that's going to be like saying enabling our customers' electrified home, right? I mean, it's kind of understood, right? But the fact of the matter is, whether our consumers are comfortable within Apple in an iOS environment or Android, we want to enable them to have that choice when they get into the vehicle. And so for us, it's not about competition, it's more about choice. Having said that, we do believe that from a manufacturer perspective and from an auto OEM perspective, we do bring a certain capability and a certain expertise in terms of, again, the user experience within the vehicle. I know there's a lot of criticism for our infotainment systems and for our displays. Well, actually, Sync 3 is getting rave reviews from a quality standpoint and from a satisfaction standpoint. And there are things that we want to do in terms of, how do you access the HVAC controls and how do you interact with the vehicle? And so that car user experience is very important to us, and we're not just going to cede that territory to Google and Apple. We cooperate with them quite readily from a partnership standpoint. They're really good partners of ours. But we believe that AppLink and its open source version, Smart Device Link, needs to be maintained as a third alternative for a couple of fundamental reasons. Number one, from the aspect of an app developer, we provide more capability, we provide more data access, we provide more ability for them to tailor that experience in terms of what it looks like on the center screen, in terms of how you interact with it by voice, more so than they can do within a CarPlay or an Android Auto experience. Secondly, we are a global corporation, right? China is one of our most important markets. The share of iOS in China is not nearly as large as it is here in the US, for instance, and you can't get Android Auto in China. And so we do need that third linking technology. And it's why we believe SDL continues to be a critical piece and a component for us. And in fact, we're actually opening up the SDL developer portal today, and we're encouraging other automakers to join us as well. And we're happy that Toyota has agreed to adopt SDL, and we're working with them quite closely right now. And also, we're in the midst of forming the governance around, how do we move SDL forward in a way that is mutually beneficial for all automakers. It's not just a Ford-controlled kind of thing anymore, and we absolutely want to make sure that others can benefit and that others can join and participate as well.
One of the challenges that I see in my travels around this country and around the world is there are cities. So the problem that we're wrestling with is a city-by-city struggle to deal with traffic, transportation issues, et cetera, enabling people to get around more quickly and safely and with less smaller carbon footprint, if you will. And what I find that there's very limited interaction between car companies and cities. There may be some more interaction at the state DOT level, for example, in the U.S., and certainly at the U.S. DOT level, but I think it's really a city level issue. So you see companies like Waze reaching out to San Francisco, Sao Paulo, Rio, et cetera. Is Ford prepared to take on the mobility challenge at the city level? Is anything happening now?
Absolutely. And while there's nothing that I can announce here today, you can expect announcements going forward in terms of us working with cities as customers, because we absolutely believe, similarly to what you've expressed, that the mobility challenges, actually they vary by city and by urban location. And what happens in London is different than what happens in San Francisco. There may be some common modalities, but each city is different. And so we're actually beginning to work with cities as customers and understanding what are their needs and how can we, in terms of where we're shifting on the mobility landscape and, again, moving beyond just the vehicle as that single point solution and looking at multimodal solutions involving urban and public transport, and even what we're doing with our InfoCycle experiment, for instance, which is connecting bicycles up to understand commuting patterns and other types of data. So expect to see announcements from us going forward around cities as customers and partnering more closely with cities, because we're all looking for solutions that will enable people to have better lives. That's what we've been about from the very beginning. It's what Henry Ford has been about when he said opening the highways for all mankind. The way that we do that is going to be different as we go forward. We'll need to work much more closely in terms of partnerships, and cities will absolutely be one of those partners.
One of the very interesting things with the smart mobility announcements and the Ford Pass announcement was the reference to, was the reference to fractional ownership. That was one of those applications that, like the Volvo delivery of groceries to your car application, they're like, what? It's kind of a think different proposition. And I'm wondering kind of where that came from and where that stands, and are there some insurance implications, et cetera?
Sure, and actually we're working through what some of those implications might be. And so from markets in India where it could be shared family or friend usage in ownership of a vehicle, to we're conducting an experiment with Ford Credit in Austin of fractional or shared lease ownership of a vehicle as well. And candidly, what we're doing is we're experimenting. We're trying to understand, okay, what are the insurance implications? How do we map that out? How do you kind of gauge and allocate usage of the vehicle, and how can you best allow those folks to interact so that the usage of the vehicle is seamless and the movement from one person to the other is seamless? How do we, on our own internal systems, how do we change those? Because our credit systems and our identification systems are all mapped up around single individuals, right? How do you broaden that? How do you do a credit score across a number of individuals as opposed to one? So the reason that we're doing the experiments is actually to work through some of those challenges, so that once we identify, potentially, again, if that's an area that it looks like we can play to win and we have the assets that will allow us to have a sustainable competitive advantage, our own internal processes hopefully have been developed as well, so that we can deploy quite rapidly as we go forward.
Can I get a quick answer on your customer responses to your usage-based insurance initiatives?
So those are nascent at this point, and again, that's one of the areas that we're still learning.
Quick answer.
Nascent, okay.
Can you comment on the status of Ford's progress towards giving the customer data ownership and portability between carriers?
Sure. So again,
are you there yet, or are you working on that?
So when you say portability,
like I can take my data using a Ford platform and offer, get insurance offers from multiple carriers.
That's our whole intent, is actually to empower consumers with a driver score, if you will, and allow them to use that for their benefit. Maybe bringing potential relationships to them, right, if we see a pattern that might make sense. But ultimately, our consumers, and empowering them with the data and with the information so that they can decide, hey, this is a score that I want to shop around, or I'm comfortable where I am.
And I have to ask you, since we just ran into Mark Rosekind in the hall outside, so we cannot leave this conversation without talking about safety. And obviously, Ford was a leader in using the smartphone connected in the car for the 911 assist application. My colleague actually had that experience, actually got T-boned in an extended cab F-150 on a sales trip I was on a few months ago, and he didn't realize actually what was happening at the time. But I'm not going to go there. That's working, and you're a leader there, and others are following that lead. But my question is, is there any thought to leveraging these new strategies, services, to better engage with customers so you can find those cars that have outstanding recalls?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and so as we connect up vehicles, we have the ability to understand, where have recalls been performed and where have they not. We're obviously compliant with the TREAD Act, and so anything that we would learn or leverage from a connected vehicle becomes part of our broader database in terms of things that come in from warranty information or other field incidents. And just maybe in conclusion, this whole sort of vision of a connected future and our lives being enhanced by that, we believe it needs to be built on this foundation of trust, and there are two facets to that foundation. I talked about one of them, which was privacy, so empowering our consumers and making sure that we don't do anything without their informed consent. And then on the other hand, security. Security from the standpoint of kind of core vehicle safety and making sure that we don't do anything that endangers consumers as we leverage these connected services, but also security from the standpoint of cybersecurity, right? This isn't just something that we're waking up to now. We've had it and we've been cognizant of it for quite some time. Even if you think about going back to Sync when it was launched in 2007, there's a firewall inside our vehicle between those infotainment-related services and the more kind of mission-critical kinds of things like the powertrain controller. And so we've had that in mind. And so from a consumer standpoint, engendering that trust really key, security, privacy, the two facets of that.
And you're even doing Wi-Fi software updates.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Please thank Don for his thoughts this morning.
Thank you.